G'day everybody, welcome to Host Plus One. Andy Maher, your host, and joined by a man who is universally loved in the game of football. The journey has been well told, it's been watched by millions around the world, it's been enjoyed by everybody. Retired after a magnificent career spanning 288 games, becomes one of 4 Irishmen to play in an AFL premiership winning side. One was added to that list only a couple of weeks ago. Of course, I talk about Zach Tuohy, who joins us on the show. It's a joy to have you in here, mate. Thanks for coming in for a chat.
Nah, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me.
The whole, if you had said to me 6 months ago, would you be in here discussing your retirement? I'm not sure I would have thought you would be. I thought you were going that well that there was at least another year in you. So when did it start to kind of materialise that this might have been the last year for you?
Yeah, it's. I was thinking about it all year. I knew coming in that there was a reasonable chance it might be. And about that halfway mark, I was playing well. I was feeling good. I still enjoyed the game. My body was holding up quite well. There's a couple of little red flags that I wasn't moving as well as I have done. But towards the end, when I was considering whether or not I should play on, there was a few red flags. But one, which I've said before, was that the only thing I kept thinking about was the prospect of playing 300 games. Like, that kept jumping to the top of the list.
Right.
And that was a bit of a red flag for me. I don't like that that's where my mind kept wandering to, and I've never really been motivated by those kind of individual things before. And I just couldn't really think of a better reason to go on, despite the fact I still loved it, than to get that milestone. And for me, that was kind of ushering me that maybe that's your mind or your body telling you it's time to finish.
So was it more the mindset that kind of not worried you, but triggered you into getting here, as opposed to the physical, if there was any obvious deterioration, that the physical side of what you were going through?
Yeah, well, one of the physical things that did come into the equation was that I had some games this year where I felt good going in. Like, I was excited to play. There was no kind of mental weight there. And the games weren't really panning out the way I liked. And I found it really hard to understand why. So over the last few years, I have had knee issues. I've had back issues. And when I've played bad, I was always able to put it down to that was just a bad, like my knee was flaring up and I need to figure it out.
Yep.
I couldn't really figure out why I wasn't more impactful this year as a player. And that, again, factored in with the, what I was thinking about next year with the milestone was like, I can't put my finger on why I'm not better or why I'm not performing more. And again, these are all, you tally all these up and it's like, I think I'm ready to finish.
It's fascinating you say that, because we spoke to Mac Horton on one of these episodes, former Australian swimmer. And when he failed to qualify for Paris, whenever he didn't meet a marker that he'd set for himself, when he hit the wall, he kind of knew straight away. He would go, that wasn't a great swim, and I know what I did wrong. It was turn 3, it was breathing, whatever it was. He knew. But when he hit the wall that day and failed to qualify for Paris, he was in the water and he went, I don't know what just happened. I don't know why I didn't swim a time. And it sounds a bit the same with you.
Yeah, exactly. I was having games where I know physically there was nothing inhibiting me.
Yeah. And
I felt sharp, I felt good, but this happened a few times. And I spoke to a coach about it and I was kind of like, no, I can't. Every game in my career, I've been able to tell you what the thing I did bad was. Or this game I had, this aspect was down, or this niggle was really affecting me. There's games I was just like, I don't know why I didn't contribute more. And that happened a few times. And again, with the other considerations I had, and funnily enough, when I actually made the decision, as in committed to it mentally, it was so obvious to me then it was the right call. It was almost like, why did I agonise over this for months? Now that I've made it, it was like, yeah, obviously it's the right time.
Can you explain that to us? Like, what have you been able to work out what the mental flip is that occurs?
Well, I think your ego or your pride gets in the way. So it's very hard as a footballer to admit that actually I'm not the player I was a couple of years ago. And your competitive nature kicks in, like anyone who plays, I mean, at the top level of any industry probably, but certainly a sport like footy. To play at the top for a long time, you have to be naturally super competitive. There has to be a pride element. And one thing I have one thing I've taken pride in with myself is that there has been a lot of times over my career where I've played with some pretty serious physical, limitations, through injuries and different stuff like that. And I've always been quite proud of the fact that I just find a way of playing. But after a while, it was just like, yeah, I have to swallow my pride here. Like I'm just not the player I was. And I think that kind of combative nature and that, no, I'll find a way of getting better is just, is what made me put the decision off for so long. But once I made it, it was just like obviously you should have retired.
So if you look back now, if we ask you to look back now and in the weeks between games in 2024, the weeks between games, the training, getting out of bed to go to training, turning up to getting through a training session, the enthusiasm to rehab, the enthusiasm to go through your tape, to sit down with your all of that stuff, was that all as it had been? Was the heart still in it to the same degree as it had been?
Yeah, completely. So that stuff wasn't really the issue. But so again, when I made the decision, as in committed to it, there was a number of times in the weeks after where I was really aware, more than I've ever been, of how hard I found it to warm up. So my thing with again, I've been carrying a knee injury for a few years, and I've been able to manage it. But the week after I retired, we do inserts in training, which is just a sprint. You know, we don't do them every training, but to get up to speed. And it was occurring to me every time I tried to do it, it was like I'm actually limping for the first 20 meters, and like I just was never that aware of it. I just become used to that kind of constant little pain. And there was a few times since I announced the retirement that I was just like, how did I keep doing this, like, without really being aware of it? So there's a mental thing that once you commit to retirement, your body goes, like. And then I just became more aware of these niggles. But the enthusiasm never wavered. In fact, it peaked, knowing that there was only a few weeks left. But there was plenty of moments I was like, God, this is hard.
So can you talk to us about the joy that the season doesn't end the way you wanted it to end, right? So personally and from a collective. But, you know, the day you kicked your first in the game after you'd announced the retirement down at Geelong, and it was a bit of a rout. Like you were doing a number on North that day. But it was beautiful to see you kick that. I don't know how you did that. I still don't. No one. My kids saw you do that and have been trying to work it out ever since. They are clearly not coordinated enough to do it. But the joy was obvious. Like, you look like, okay, I'm here. I know the finishing line's there. There's maximum a number of. You knew what the maximum number of games were left, and it did look like you were enjoying yourself.
It was a perfect day. Like, even the conditions were perfect, so the stands were full, and the club made a big deal of it. There was, we got told during the week, obviously everyone knew Hawke was retiring, and they'd handed out 15,000 Tom Hawkins face masks. And I think in the day after I announced it, they printed 5,000 Reggies, which is, you know, every woman's dream, I'm sure. But like, it was just weird to see this kind of Irish flags and all this kind of jazz. And the reception I was getting every time I was touching the ball, that was another thing that kind of struck me. And it was a pretty perfect day. And the whole heart symbol thing, that was, I spoke to my son the day before, and I was like, if I kick one, like, what should I do? And we were talking about this heart thing. And don't worry, I had to practice as well.
Yeah, no, still don't know how you're doing.
So I knew where they were sitting. I pointed it at them, and then the crowd seemed to really enjoy it. And I made it all about me.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah,
that's
a very self-indulgent day. But it was a perfect way to bow out.
How are they going to go with it? Like, the kids, how old are the kids now?
10 and 5.
So they're very aware of who you are and what you do for a living, and all of the trappings that come with it. You know, they get into all that stuff, of being in the rooms and getting free party pies and the whole box and dice that comes with being your kids. How are they going with it?
Well, it's funny. My 10-year-old obviously knows what I do, and he's come to all the games for his whole life, really. But it never really struck him that it was anything significant until he started going to school.
Right.
And then I'd drop him, and the other kids would spot me, and he was like, why does he know who you are? And so his interest has grown significantly. And he was actually, it was cute. You don't like seeing him upset, but he was upset at the prospect of me retiring, which was kind of nice in a weird sort of way. And the 5-year-old, he's like a space cadet. He didn't really know. He just wants to run onto the oval, which he's done a few times now. But actually at the prelim, we were watching up in the stand, and he was cracking it because he wasn't allowed to run on at the start of the game, mind you, not even the end. But now they've taken it all right. It's something, they'll reflect on it in the years to come. But it's been a good journey with them.
So we'll talk about what Geelong came to mean to you a bit later on in the chat. Which is clearly special to you. Like, the way this club, you've taken this club to your heart after what happened to you halfway through your career is pretty obvious. How will you tell your story? If a kid from Portlaoise, you go home and you have a coffee. I think, have you still got the coffee shop back home? So you drop in and you have a muffin and a coffee, and some kid comes up to you and goes, I won't even try and do the accent, but says, oh, you're Zach Tuohy. And you say, yep. And they say, tell me about, how did you do it? How would you tell your story to a kid back home?
I think on reflection, I feel very little of what I've done or achieved is actually a direct result of anything I've done. I feel like I've been really lucky at most turns, both with family. Growing up, I had great upbringing, and I was from a big footballing town, and now it's still a long shot from there to end up in the AFL. But the scout who picked me at the time, again, I didn't force my way into his calculations. He was just good enough to spot me. But look, the only thing that I maybe did was careful with who I surrounded myself by. Certainly growing up, I had a really good friends group that didn't often get into any real trouble. And even throughout my footy journey, you can still get caught up in some wrong crowds, and it hasn't been an issue for me. So incredible good fortune, which is hard to actively seek out, but that is kind of how I look back on my time. When I look back at the things I've achieved, it's like, geez, I was lucky.
What if you had to comment on why you were identified by that scout, if it wasn't what he said to you, but what you thought he saw, what might that have been, do you think?
Well, I know what the attributes that they look for are, and I have spoken to Jared Shawley, who was the guy who brought me out. It's the explosiveness. That's the trait that translates most adequately from GA to AFL. The skills can be trained. That's almost the least important aspect of it. I played halfback the year I was drafted, so and obviously the tackling aspect of GA is dialed down pretty significantly. So if you're explosive and quick, it stands out even more in GA than it does in AFL. So I would think he would say that was what piqued his interest early. In fact, I know it was. There was a specific instance in a game, which he has told me since, was what did it for.
So
there was. It was a point I kicked, or a goal. A point is a good thing in GA. I caught a kick in and just ran 50 or 60 metres, kind of past a couple of players. Now it was a very nice score, but at the time I obviously didn't realise what that would lead to. And the other thing for the Irish guys especially is that they tend to get scouted or drafted off just flashes. Like, it doesn't have to be remarkably consistent season. There just has to be that one thing that they see, and it's like, oh, we can work with that. Because AFL clubs, they're not looking for the finished article. They don't want the finished article. They want somebody that can mould in their image with the skill set that will translate. So power is absolutely the number one attribute.
Did you know that there was somebody in the house that day having a look?
Yeah, there was murmurs around the league. So it's called the minor competition, so the under-18s. And there was rumours that there was scouts around. It wasn't something that happened very often back then. There was a big hiatus, really, with Irish players coming out to the AFL. And this was kind of at the start of that happening again. But yeah, we knew there was rumours. But it's very hard to deliberately draw their attention or to actively seek them out and say, would you consider me? You just have to hope they see something in you.
So he did, taps you on the shoulder. Does he come into the rooms after the game? Is it that immediate, the kind of point of contact?
It was a few days after we got knocked out, and he did it extremely old school. So he got an actual phone book and just looked through Tuohy's.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and called me on the house phone.
Oh, my God.
And as it happens, we were the first Tuohy that he called. And as it happens, I answered the phone. And we had just lost. We had just lost to a team from Northern Ireland. And if you've spoken to anyone from Northern Ireland, the accent is challenging, even for me. So I wasn't expecting an Australian accent. So I assumed it was somebody from Northern Ireland asking me about the game we just lost. And he said who he was and asked me to a combine. And that was 17 years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible. Amazing. Yeah. So the pitch gets made. We like what you've got. We think we can mould you into something in our game on the other side of the planet. Was your interest immediate, or did you have to work through a few things?
Nah, immediate. Yep. Absolutely. All I've ever wanted to be was a professional athlete.
Right.
And growing up, the only real path to professionalism for me was soccer, for example. Now, I was desperate to be a soccer player, but I wasn't good enough, and I never played rugby. That might be the other one. So when AFL came knocking, it wasn't like, oh, just let me mull it over. It was like day dot. That's all I began to think about. Like college work, everything was put on the back burner, and I just laser focused on making that happen. And it was still a long shot at the time, but we did the combine in Limerick, the University of Limerick back home, and all these minor guys from all over Ireland, and guys that I knew were from bigger counties than mine.
Mm-hmm.
I knew their reputation as a result was bigger than mine. So it kind of seemed like, and I kind of had confidence issues at that age, to be honest, anyway. So it was like, all right, well, let's just have a dip, and if it works, it works. But it felt like a long shot. But yeah, there was a few things I did a fair bit better than them that day that I think caught their attention.
Like what?
Skills.
Yep.
Yeah, I know I said that's the bit that's most malleable and doesn't have to be, but I did feel that day I was a long way ahead of them skills-wise.
Yep.
And I don't think they were ahead of me in many other areas. Like, they might have been a bit fitter and all the tests are a little bit stronger, but the difference was negligible.
Yep.
And then I felt I'd put a big gap on them in terms of skills, and pretty quickly got the tap on the shoulder to come back to come out.
Yeah. So you have the explosiveness and the athleticism. You need there's another aspect to the kind of physical requirements of playing the game that you played for nearly 300 games and for 14 seasons at a very high level throughout. Did you have to do? Were you already quite well put together, or did you have to sort of spend a bit of time working on that?
Nah, it happened pretty naturally. I never did weights really before I came here, but I've always been like thick set.
Yeah.
You know, big legs, and that's always where my weight has been distributed. Again, probably why I've maybe been a powerful kind of athlete. So I came out, I was about 88 kilos when I came out. Now I look a fair bit skinnier than I do now.
We're not allowed to talk. We're not allowed to talk about that.
We can't do that anymore.
No, well, you can, of course. If you want to, you can.
I do want
to.
Yeah,
right.
So I was a skinny 88 kilos, which is still a pretty hefty weight. Like, so that was my starting base, and I reckon by February and March in my first year, I was up to mid-90s. Because I hadn't come off a weightlifting base. And that's kind of where I played my whole career at. That kind of, like, 92 would be as light as I've ever played.
Yep.
And 97 would be as heavy. But I'm in that bracket. And I've always been bottom heavy. So my weight's always distributed in the bottom half, which is where you want it, really. So yeah, I always had kind of the physical makeup. It was just about hardening up a bit.
So you come after that. You come from your hometown. You do the trials in Limerick, and you turn up at Princes Park. Can you remember the first sense of what you were struck by? The facilities, the play, your teammates, the requirements, a new town. How did all that settle with you?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting early on. It wasn't the facilities, I can tell you, because that was at the time when they just knocked the stand that they're currently in, and we were underneath the old stand, so that was actually quite underwhelming.
Yep.
But the excitement was like palpable. All I can remember from the early days, outside of the excitement, was the gulf between me and the rest of them, fitness-wise. It was, and I'm kind of above average fitness, but not like an elite runner, and it was really obvious. So we did like the Princes Park time trial. I think I tried to cut a corner late on in that time trial because I thought I was so far behind. And then there was a fence that I couldn't get over, so I had to loop back and actually cost myself more time. But that was the kind of level I was at. So the fitness was the big thing.
How quickly did you feel like you kind of caught up?
Reasonably quick. And I wasn't the least fit there, so that was comforting. But I've never cramped, for example, in my life as a GAA player. But the prospect of playing a 2-hour-long game, which is reckless. If you were inventing a game from scratch, you would never make it 2 hours long. Like, it's stupid. I love it. I wouldn't change it, and I wouldn't shorten it. But the first game I played, it was like full body, both legs, like groins going. It was fun. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Did you remember how you pulled up the next day?
Yeah, not great. Yeah, and that was the case for a while. I reckon I was pulling up like pretty average for like maybe a year, like a whole season, just because I wasn't conditioned for that long and that kind of physical contact. And after a while, you get conditioned, and it's not a big deal. But yeah, it took me a while. So
look, if we had more time, we'd dive into first kick, first goal, first opponent, all that sort of stuff. But we don't. So we're going to do the big signpost moment. So you play 120 games at Carlton, and you are loved as a Carlton supporter. I can say that, and hopefully you felt that from the other side of the fence. But there comes this moment where you're out of contract, or you want to extend, and the footy club doesn't meet your demands, and you leave the club. I want to know how that they bring you out, they put you up, they give you the jumper, they say you're one of us.
Yep.
And then there's this moment. I don't think there was much between what they were offering and what you wanted.
Yeah.
What happened, and how did that make you feel?
Well, ultimately, really what happened is that I don't think I was actually... I think I was probably not in their long-term plans. That was the feeling I got at the time. I didn't get on particularly well with Bolts, who was the coach at the time. I don't think he particularly liked me, quite honestly. And for the record, right up until really late in the piece, I was desperate not to leave. I was really upset that I had to leave. It was a really tough decision to make, but it kind of got to a point late in the season and after the season even where it just became untenable. I was so convinced that I wasn't wanted, and that they wanted me gone because maybe I had enough currency to, I think they wanted to get a couple of players in, but I was desperate to stay. Yeah. And there was one aspect of the contract which really indicated to me that they clearly don't think I'm going to be a first team player for the next couple of years. Effectively, I wanted to be off match payments. That was the detail. They were offering me a modest contract, but it also had a lot of match payments. And at that time, I hadn't missed a game it was 3 or 4 seasons without missing a single game. So I asked my manager, I'll take less money than all that's worth, but if you accumulate all the match payments, take less than that, I will take that. But I just don't want match payments because that tells me they don't think I'll play every week. Mm-hmm. And that was it. That was the only sticking point. And they kind of weren't willing to budge. And yeah, a few other things happened, which are all outlined in my book.
Yep,
which is coming
which
out
we'll
soon.
Talk about in a minute. Yep,
it's all outlined in there. But ultimately, I was desperate to stay. I loved the place. I really didn't want to go, but it was just untenable for my own sake. I had to leave.
So 6 years into the career and the start of the journey, did you? Was there a broken hearted's too hard a way, too dramatic a way of putting it, I suspect. But did you feel like everybody at the club fought for you? Like, because I would have imagined that there would have been a lot of people at the Carlton Footy Club who saw you differently maybe than the head coach, and maybe one or two others. I don't know where the power kind of dynamic lay at the time. But were you disappointed that there weren't other people at the footy club who went to kind of fight for you?
I got on well with everyone, certainly the players. We'd all a great relationship. There was never any tension there. And even in the years prior when, the club wasn't going great on field, I loved it. There was never a point where I was like, I just don't want to be here. When those negotiations were going on, at no point was, I don't remember an admin member or anybody involved who makes in these decisions calling me for a chat and maybe explaining their point of view. That never happened. And I do think they were pretty keen to get a few other players in, and I was pretty obviously and rightly, for the record, third fiddle behind a Sam Doherty, who's genuine star or is and was, and Cade Simpson, who's a club legend. That was our half back line, and they were held in really high regard. And I just thought I was looked at as being pretty disposable, which is fine. That's the name of the game. I've seen it happen to other players, but if a fairly modest request from a contract point of view had been met, I absolutely would have stayed. But it just felt to me like I didn't want me.
Would have been very easy for me to move the magnets around to keep the three of you there. It
was a good half back line. It was a good half back line.
It would have been easy enough to work our way through that. So that's that. How did Geelong enter the picture?
Yeah, well, so Geelong's reputation kind of precedes itself amongst AFL players across the league. Everyone's aware of how Geelong operates in terms of the schedule it gives its players, the autonomy it gives its players. Lockie Henderson had left Carlton the year before, a very good friend of mine. We'd spoken. And I said to him, when things were starting to go a bit pear-shaped at Geelong, I was like, feel free to drop my name there and see what Wellesley reckons, because this isn't looking great. Yep. And ultimately, I think mine ending up in Geelong was dependent on Boris Enright retiring.
So one of the all-time greats.
I was just cheering for the goat to pack it in, so I didn't feel great about myself afterwards. I have told Borry that. I think that was the case. And as it happens, I was with Lockie Henderson in Queenstown when Boris texted the GFC group and announced to the group his retirement. He was sitting next to me and showed it to me, and I was like fist pump in the air because I was pretty sure my papers were already stamped. But yeah, the reputation, and I was pretty keen to finish whatever was left of my career at a club that would at least give me a chance at a flag. You can't guarantee it, like teams ebb and flow, but I was pretty keen to end up somewhere that I was confident, if nothing else, would give me a chance.
And if you go from that moment to the end where you are now, how much did they go about restoring? Again, faith might be too strong a word, but all the things you think that a footy club should be to the individual who they invest so much in, and you give everything you've got to the cause, the collective. How much did the experience at Geelong kind of restore all the good thoughts that you wanted to have in your head?
Yeah, it did, and it's been a remarkable move for me. But like, just to labour for just a second on the Carlton point, like I don't want anyone thinking like, oh, I just hated it.
No.
It was just that last 6 months, 8 months was really tough, and it did leave a slightly sour taste in my mouth. But if there is baggers listening, genuinely love the place. I loved my time,
and it's reciprocated.
Yeah,
it really is.
And I've always actually maintained, even since leaving, a really good relationship with Carlton fans, which I have noticed in the crowd. But yeah, my time at Geelong, I couldn't have known when I went there really what I was about to sign up for. The lifestyle is one thing. It kind of has a geographical benefit. I think it's one of the reasons it's a destination club. But I've 2 young kids now, but I had a 2-year-old at the time, and just that step back in terms of like the pace and the rat race that is Melbourne compared to Geelong was such a healthy. It came at such a good time for me. And then I decided when I went to Geelong that they don't really know what I'm like or who I am. So I can kind of come in and be, whatever version I want to be. And a big thing for me was, like, for example, in the last year at Carlton, I tried to get into the leadership group, didn't get in, which was fine, like goes to a vote. But I was pretty flat at the time with the vote and how that process played out. And then I went to Geelong, tried to put my best foot forward, ended up in the leadership group in the second year. And for me, that was huge at the time. That was real vindication and validation for, me as a player. And really ever since then, it was just like, as I did for the first 6 years of my Carlton career, the entirety of my Geelong career, I just felt super valued and a really valuable member of the club.
So you talk about the validation you get from becoming a member of the leadership group. You speak at the Best and Fairest, a couple of weeks ago, and about, your time at Geelong. And you talk about Tom Hawkins in a way that I think we're all moved by. I think everybody who heard you talking to that collective about him and what he's meant to you and what he means to that group. When you kind of step outside yourself and you go, I was a leader, I was in the leadership group of a team that had all of these players and has done so much in the time that you've been there. How do you reflect on that? Yeah,
it's strange. I remember thinking when I was a younger player that if I was ever at a team or a club that was good enough to win a premiership, whether or not I would be good enough as an individual to be in that team. So it's one thing being at a club that gets there, but you have to be, good enough to be in the team.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter otherwise.
Yep.
So to then be kind of at the BNF just a few weeks ago talking about like Hawk and Danger and Joel's being there and all these great players. That's why I don't much feel like I am good enough really to be in the leadership group of a team like that. So that's why I kind of have an overwhelming sense of like gratitude, and all the things that I feel like I've achieved have actually been because other people have invested something in me or seen something in me that I didn't see. And that's probably a perfect example because he's better than just an all-time great. Like, this is a legend of the game. So yeah, it's surreal to look back on.
Isn't that great? I mean, to hear somebody like you who's done so much say something about other people, I'm almost not, not this, but I'm almost not worthy to have their respect because of, who they are. And that a lot of people will go, no, you're underselling yourself here.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, that's happened a few times throughout my career as a whole, but certainly at Geelong. I remember when Danger played his 300th, Joel was out there waiting to cheer him off, and Joel called me over, and I was like, you are kidding if you think I'm carrying him off. There's no chance. There's like 15 All-Australians between the three of us. It's like, guess how many I contributed? None. So stuff like that does strike me every now and then, but it probably just highlights the fact again of how just valued I have felt.
And do you love that club? Like, Carlton is, so forget about that. But is the love, is it real heart-filling, heart-swelling love that you have for Geelong?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
well, it's just, I've said a few times, I do consider myself a Geelong person now. I'll probably end up living there forever. And that's not to say I don't feel like I've two clubs to barrack for, but I do feel like it came along at just such a good time in my life, both like professionally and off-field. And like I said, I'm not sure I really justified 288 games, but I only got them because Geelong persisted with me, as they do with a lot of their senior players. Well,
they're generally pretty good at having their reasons why, and the reasons why were pretty obvious watching you play your footy. You are a premiership player now, like there's only 4 of you that have done it in the men's game, and one added their name to it. I'm talking about the Irishman, obviously.
Yeah.
One added their name in the last grand final. How does that make you when you think about that?
Yeah, it's strange, and I have to admit I do find myself just peeking into the drawer and having a look at the medallion every now and then, and it became a really well documented obsession for me in my career, especially towards the end and towards the last maybe 3 or 4 years when we lost prelims and lost grand finals. And the older you get, or in my experience, the older you get, the worse you get at taking losses. Like, you don't actually mature in that way. If anything, you go backwards.
Right.
Because I think you're just more aware that the chances are going to be fewer and fewer. And to get there in the end was still doesn't feel real. I remember it every now and then. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Do you have like one of the moments that will linger for many of us after that game was you with the county flag draped over your back and just having the moments that you had. And I imagine everybody in that position, you have all of those moments with your teammates, and I imagine half of it's a blur, maybe more than half it's a blur. But do you have any memories of the moments after the game when it was just you and the physical connection to your home county in the MCG with all of that going on around you?
Yeah, there was a lot going on. The flag, there is one photo from the grand final that it's from behind, and I had the flag on my back, and you can see really clearly the Portlaoise crest. Like, it's not crumpled up, it's spread really perfectly with the MCG in the background. And I always look at that and think, if that doesn't like sum up kind of like my whole career, the people who invested really early on in developing me, and I'm here now in Australia at the iconic sports venue, everything about it just kind of gives me goosebumps thinking about it. So there was a lot of moments like that, and even the flag that I did have on stage that said "Come on the Town," which is our catch cry for our club. I had that made in 2020. So that flag was there when we lost the grand final, and then it was there obviously when we won it. So there's lots of little moments like that if you want to be a little bit philosophical about it, like, yeah, that represents a fair bit to me.
Have you ever heard, I'm sure you have, what it meant to the people back home to see those images?
Yeah, my club in particular, Portlaoise, they've gone well and truly above and beyond in terms of celebrating the premiership. They've that way too, but they've also put on like a couple of functions in my honour when I got back.
Awesome.
In our gym at our club, they've installed 2 massive signs that are permanent fixtures in our gym with those photos of me with the premiership flag, and they'll be there forever. And that was kind of shown to me on the day before I flew back to Australia when I'd gone back that time. And they wear it like a badge of honour, which isn't the case for every club back in Ireland.
Yeah.
A lot of them resent their players leaving.
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Is that still a thing, or is it?
I think it's rarer now than it's been, but there's always those traditionalists who see the AFL as like an invading force.
Yeah, and particularly with the women now, like there's just so many of them coming out for the W. So we know what it meant to Kennelly and Kerry and his father's, legacy, and he wanted to follow in his footsteps at GA8 level after he'd, done what he did in 2005. Is there an itch that needs scratching for you?
Yeah, there is. I was hoping I could sneak back this week. My team are actually playing in the final this weekend. Not to be, unfortunately, this year, but the plan is to go back if I can, depending on what line of work I end up in next year. But around this time of year, I'd love to go back and play for my club for the entirety of the championship, which is played over a couple of months, so it's not a huge time commitment, but it's a lot more than an itch. I'm festering.
Yeah. It's going to be time dependent though, isn't it?
It is, and there's a few things I have to work through, but if there's any feasible way of me being in Ireland this time next year to play for Portlaoise, I will definitely do it.
Well, just whoever you're speaking to from an employment perspective, just make that a non-negotiable.
Put it on the board early.
So is there a logical reason for why the Irish, men and women, come out here and assimilate into our game as well as they do you think?
Yeah, well, a big thing is probably the cultural similarities. We're virtually, barring skin complexion and accents, we're basically the same people.
Yes.
Like culturally, we're almost identical. So I think that helps. And like I said, skill set wise, once you're bringing out somebody with the physical attributes, the skills can be learned. And the games are extremely similar despite some obvious differences. So, good athletes coming out to a similar culture.
Are you aware, you've talked about the gym back home. Do you have a broader sense, if you make yourself part of the kind of collective of Irish men and women that have come out here, now that we've maybe pushed a bit of the resentment to one side, I'm sure there are some that will still have it, but are you aware of the impact that you've had on sport in Ireland as a group?
Well, yeah, as a group, I think it probably has been really significant, especially in recent years with, the success the girls have had. Yep. There's a lot of premiership girls in the league now. There's a lot of girls in the league now. And in only 2 years, we've added 3 Irish male premiership players when there had only been one for the previous, ever, I guess. And the coverage is better. Everything's better. So there has been a really significant impact as a whole on Ireland's perception of the AFL and life out here. And I think it's a really positive advertisement for AFL, which the GAA might not like, but if they started paying or treating their players better, it might not be an issue. But yeah, I think as a whole, the game is looked on extremely favourably back home. Does
it change? Do you think it changes the ambitions? So you had an ambition to be a professional sports person as a teenager. That's still clearly the case for thousands of Irish boys and girls who want to do that. But is this actually a pathway now? Do you reckon there are kids that are growing up over there who maybe aren't thinking about going to play for Liverpool and Manchester United, but are actually thinking about going to play for Carlton or Geelong?
Well, I know for a fact there are. I've met them. My nephew's one. He's kind of seen me play for a long time, and it's been an ambition of his. I know that for a fact. So, yeah, there is, and it's a much more tangible pathway to professional sport than, say, soccer or rugby. Is probably the only other one that's maybe as feasible. But if you're an excellent GAA player, it is the obvious place to go to pursue it as a livelihood. So, the Irish influence and the number of Irish players in the league will only grow over the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. So you mentioned the book. It's coming out on the 4th of November. Mm-hmm. What should we expect from it?
Oh, it's just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, all the usual stuff speedboats and helicopters. Look, it's the Irish experiment for obvious reasons, and it was a good process, right? It felt like therapy, to be honest. Initially, when you start the process, I was wondering how interesting it would be, and we certainly weren't short of material. That's for sure. But yeah, it's been great, and it'll be out in a few weeks, and it'll be interesting to see what the reception is like. But a lot of those off-field footy contract details, all that stuff that I guess people might find interesting is in there. It's pretty bare bones.
Are you getting better at talking about yourself?
I've always loved talking about myself. No, I do. I enjoy reflecting on it. But I do just feel like I've played with too many actual elite top tier players that it just gets a bit awkward. With the adulation makes me a bit uncomfortable.
So Chris Scott's put you front and centre. He's just put out the word at the BNF for every media organisation in Australia that they've got to employ. Is there something in this industry that you'd like to pursue?
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed the media. I've never felt like as a player, some players can maybe get a little bit cynical about the coverage about them or their club. I've always loved dipping my toe into that space, and I've never felt any real kind of animosity towards the industry as a whole. So post-career, it's absolutely where I want to get into. If anybody
is out there,
wants me to bring coffees for 6 months and work my way up, I'm happy to.
I don't think you'll have to do that. That's what people like me used to have to do. So how are you confronting it? Like, some people talk about the cliff and they look into the abyss and they can't see anything. Yep. You've got a young family. Are you clear-eyed, even though it's a bit unknown and uncertain what's coming next? But are you looking forward to, with enthusiasm, for what comes next?
Yeah, that kind of scary abyss that hasn't quite hit me yet. Now it might come, but right now it is just excitement. And as a player retiring, I'm super aware that I will need to replace that combative stuff with something. I'll need a physical goal, and I've got some ideas, and it'll be different sports and different stuff so I can do. For me, that's going to be the risk if in 6 months' time I don't have a physical thing to work towards. I know me well enough to know that's going to trouble me. But in terms of going into this next chapter, I'm still overwhelmingly excited, more so than nervous or worried now. That might change. But yeah, right now it's just excitement.
So you haven't had to kind of deal with that? Because it's one of those things that you do hear players.
Yeah. It's pretty well documented. Yeah. No, look, I think it might come, and I think I'm ready for it when that feeling does hit me. But for the most part, it does feel a little bit like a weight is being lifted. I do think as an athlete, you live permanently with a certain level of performance anxiety that you don't even realize is there. I felt that with food, believe it or not, and food's never been an issue for me, and weight's never been an issue, all those things. But there has been more than a few times since I've retired. I was like, I'll just have some chips with my meal, and it highlights to me how often I was making those micro decisions without realizing as a player. So all that, like, it feels freeing at the minute, but it will change, and I'll be nervous in a few weeks. But.
So as you hang them up and you leave it behind, how would you describe your relationship with footy?
Oh, I love it, yeah. It's been completely reinvigorated. And like I said, the overwhelming majority of my career I've loved. I've never fallen out of love with the game, maybe for a very short period. But I love it again, and I like watching it. And genuinely, I don't mean to keep going back to it, I found myself, there was actually a moment a couple of years ago when I was watching the Blues play, and I found myself fist pumping, which I haven't done in a long time. And I was like, oh, it's all coming back to me. Everything just feels good again. So I love it.
Well, the one good thing about the two clubs you played for, and even though Geelong might have most of your heart attached to it these days, at least they're both navy blue and white. And despite the fact there's some hoops and a CFC, if you just keep the wardrobe blue and white, it's very interchangeable, no matter where you might find yourself. Thanks for everything you gave us. We've loved your journey. We've loved the way you've conducted yourself as a footballer and as a teammate of the two clubs that you've been teammates of those blokes at. You've carried yourself with enormous distinction throughout your career, and 300 would have been nice, but 288 sounds pretty good to me. So, and there's a premiership there as well. So congratulations on everything you're able to achieve, and thanks for coming in for a chat today.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Andy.
Good man. Zach Tuohy, our special guest. Host +1. See you again soon.